they said, a girl vanished into the mountains that spring, sold for a rifle and 3 sacks of flour on the courthouse steps, while decent folk watched and said nothing. The town figured she was dead by winter, cast out, discarded, gone for good. But 6 months later, a letter arrived at the Denver newspaper office, sealed with wax. Signed, Mary Grace, a name nobody in Whetstone had ever heard. The editor broke the seal, unfolded the pages, and read the opening line. They said I was sold like cattle. They were half right. I was merchandise. But the man who bought me wasn't the monster. The monster was the one who sold me. The truth was about to set Whetstone on fire. That truth started 6 months earlier, on a morning when the sun beat down merciless, and a father's voice cut through the dust like a blade. Delilah followed him down the steps on shaky legs. What choice did she have? She was his now, bought and paid for. The words rattled around in her head like stones in a can. The wagon was loaded with supplies, tools, feed sacks, barrels of kerosene, everything tied down neat and secure. Gideon helped her up onto the wooden seat. His hand under her elbow was brief, impersonal, but not rough. Then he reached into a canvas bag, pulled out a rough wool blanket, and half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. Might get cold, he said. He offered both items. Eat if you're hungry. She took them automatically, clutched them to her chest like shields. The bread smelled fresh, still warm from someone's oven. But her stomach was tied in too many knots to even think about eating. Gideon climbed up beside her, took up the reins. With a gentle click of his tongue, the horses started forward. Wagon wheels rumbled over the rutted street. They left Whetstone behind. Delilah kept her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. She couldn't look back, couldn't bear to see the only home she'd ever known disappearing behind her. The blanket lay unused in her lap. Despite the cooling afternoon air, her mind whirled with questions. She was too frightened to voice. What did this man want with her? What would he make her do? How long before the kindness turned to something else? Her father's final words echoed in her head. Real suffering. The mountains loomed before them, snow-capped peaks stark against the spring sky. Somewhere up there lay whatever fate Gideon Maddox had in store. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, prayed silently for strength to face whatever lay ahead. They rode in silence. The trail climbed steadily, left the flat cattle country behind, entered rolling foothills covered in scrub oak and juniper. The air grew cooler, thinner. The horse's breath started coming out in white puffs. As the sun dropped lower, Delilah watched the landscape change, noticed things despite her fear, the way the light slanted golden through the trees. How the birdsongs were different up here, sharper, clearer, the smell of pine resin mixing with sage. Gideon didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask her questions, didn't explain anything, just guided the horses with practiced ease. His hands on the reins were steady, closed. The hands of a man who worked hard for his living. Once they passed a deer at the edge of the trail, a doe with her fawn. Gideon slowed the wagon, let them cross without hurrying them. The fawn's legs were still wobbly, new to the world. Delilah found herself watching the man beside her. From the corner of her eye, trying to figure him out, his face gave nothing away. He seemed comfortable with silence, at ease with himself, in a way she'd never seen in her father. Jed Boone filled every room with noise, with demands, with anger that simmered just below the surface, ready to boil over at the smallest provocation. This man was different, quiet, self-contained. She couldn't read him at all. The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, painting the sky orange and purple. Gideon pulled the wagon into a small clearing. Tall pines sheltered it on 3 sides. A stream bubbled nearby. The ground was level, covered in soft pine needles. We'll rest here tonight, he said. He set the brake, climbed down. Delilah stayed perched on the seat, watched as he unhitched the horses. With practiced movements, led them to the stream to drink, laid out feed for them in canvas bags, gathered wood for a fire. The spring night was settling in cold and fast. The temperature dropped with the sun. Her breath started showing white when the flames caught and began to crackle. Gideon looked up at her, best come down by the warmth. No sense freezing up there. Her stiff muscles protested as she climbed carefully down. She kept the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, settled onto a fallen log, well back from both the fire and Gideon. He didn't seem to mind her caution, just went about his tasks with quiet efficiency. Soon a pot of beans was heating over the flames. The rich smell of coffee filled the clearing. Delilah's stomach growled despite her anxiety. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Without a word, Gideon filled a tin plate and cup, set them on the log beside her, then retreated to his own spot across the fire. She ate small, careful bites. The beans were simple but good, seasoned with salt and a little bacon fat. Coffee was strong and hot. It burned going down, but warmed her from the inside. While she ate, Gideon gathered pine boughs, lashed them together into a simple lean-to shelter. Several yards from the fire, he laid out a bedroll inside it, arranged everything with the same quiet competence he'd shown in everything else. Then he returned to his place by the flames. For privacy, he explained. He'd seen her questioning look. You'll sleep there. I'll keep to this side of the fire. Delilah nodded slightly, relief mixed with her lingering fear. At least he wasn't expecting her to share his space. That was something, wasn't it? She finished the beans, drank the coffee down to the grounds, set the plate and cup aside. Gideon stood, collected the dishes, rinsed them in the stream, stowed them away, checked on the horses one more time, laid out his own bedroll on the opposite side of the fire from her shelter. The whole time he didn't come near her, didn't look at her, with anything but that same level, measuring gaze. Get some sleep, he said finally. We ride at first light. Delilah retreated to the shelter he'd built. The pine boughs smelled sharp and clean. The bedroll was surprisingly thick, warm. She could hear the stream nearby, the horses shifting and breathing, the fire crackling, and she could see Gideon's silhouette across the flames, sitting, keeping watch, protecting the camp, or guarding his purchase. She didn't know which. The sleep was a long time coming. They were on the trail again at dawn. The morning air was crisp and cold. Mist rose from the stream in ghostly wisps. Gideon had coffee ready when she emerged from the shelter, handed her a cup and a piece of hardtack. Eat, he said. Long day ahead. The trail grew steeper. The wagon creaked and swayed as Gideon guided it through narrow passes. They climbed higher. The valley they'd camped in dropped away below. The trees changed. More pine now. Less oak. Bigger. Older. The mountains rose on all sides. By mid-morning they came around a bend. Delilah saw it. A cabin tucked against a hillside. Weathered logs. A stone chimney. A shake shingle roof. A clear stream running nearby. The same one they'd been following. A small chicken coop and goat pen stood to one side. A garden plot lay dormant behind a rough fence, waiting for spring planting. The mountains rose behind it like protective walls. Pine and aspen covered the slopes. Snow still clung to the highest peaks. It looked peaceful, remote, like a place the world had forgotten about. Gideon helped her down from the wagon, led her to the cabin door, pushed it open. This is home, he said simply. Morning light filtered through two small windows, illuminated a tidy but sparse room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A table and two chairs sat nearby. Shelves held cooking implements and supplies. Everything clean, organized, cared for. A ladder led to a loft above. Kitchen's here, Gideon said. He gestured around the main room. Loft up there will be your sleeping space. My room's through that door. He pointed to the cabin's only interior door. It was closed. Then he turned to face her. His weathered face held no expression, but his voice was firm. You won't be expected to cook or clean for me. Won't be expected to serve me in any way. Delilah's eyes widened slightly. She'd assumed she'd been bought as a servant at best. A slave at worst, Gideon continued. This place is quiet. It's peace you need, not penance. You let that settle. Then gestured to the loft. Best get yourself settled. There's water in the barrel. Help yourself. He went back outside, started unloading the wagon. Delilah stood in the middle of the cabin, trying to understand what was happening, trying to reconcile what he'd just said. With everything she knew about the world, men didn't buy women and then give them freedom. That wasn't how things worked, was it? The loft was small but private. A straw-tick mattress lay against one wall. Several quilts were folded at its foot. A small window looked out over the mountains. A wooden crate served as a table. A candle sat on it. It was more than she'd had at her father's ranch. There she'd slept in the bunkhouse, with the hired hands. No privacy, no warmth, except what she could steal from their fire. This was hers. She heard Gideon moving around below, the sound of supplies being put away, his boots on the wooden floor, the cabin settling into itself. She climbed down the ladder, found him stoking the fire in the hearth. "There's stew," he said, "from yesterday. I'll heat it up." He didn't ask her to do it, just set about the task himself. They ate in silence. The stew was thick with venison and root vegetables, better than anything she'd had in months. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. The words stuck in her throat. Who was he? Why had he done this? What did he want from her? But she was too afraid of the answers, so she ate her stew, drank her water, kept quiet. After the meal, Gideon showed her around outside. The goats needed milking twice a day. The chickens needed feeding, and their eggs collected. The garden would need tending. Once they got seeds planted, there was always wood to split. "Water to haul from the stream. You help with what you can," he said, "when you're ready." No rush, he showed her where the tools were kept, where the feed was stored, how to work the gate on the goat pen. The whole time he kept his distance, didn't crowd her, didn't touch her unless necessary. By evening, exhaustion hit her like a physical weight, the fear, the uncertainty, the long ride. It all crashed down at once. "Best get some sleep," Gideon said. "Morning comes early up here." She climbed to the loft, found that he'd brought up her small bundle of belongings, the few things she'd managed to grab from her father's ranch. They sat on the crate table. The quilts were warm, soft. They smelled like cedar and wood smoke. Through the small window, she could see stars, scattered across the mountain sky, more stars than she'd ever seen, like diamonds on black velvet. The night was so quiet, just the whisper of wind through pines, the distant call of an owl, the gentle sound of the stream outside. Tears came then, silent, hot on her cheeks. She wasn't sure if she was crying from grief over her father's final rejection, or relief at finding herself somewhere unexpectedly safe, or fear that the safety was an illusion that would shatter soon. Maybe it was all of it, everything tangled together, like a knot she couldn't untie. She fell asleep to the sound of the stream and woke to golden sunlight streaming through the window, the smell of cornbread and bacon rising from below. For the first time in years, she'd slept through the night without nightmares. The third night, Delilah's old fears came rushing back. She'd been lying in the loft, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin settling, Gideon's gentle snoring from his room below, and her father's voice echoed in her head. Real suffering. You'll learn real suffering up there. What if this was all a game? What if Gideon was just waiting, biding his time? What if the kindness was a trap, and the jaws were about to snap shut? Her heart started racing. Her breath came short and fast. Panic clawed at her chest. She had to get out, had to run, had to save herself. Before it was too late, moving as quietly as she could, Delilah climbed down the ladder, found her boots by the door, slipped them on. The latch lifted with barely a sound. She slipped outside into the mountain night. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to see by. She ran into the forest, away from the cabin, her feet pounding on the pine needle carpet. Branches caught at her dress. She didn't care. She just ran. She didn't know where she was going. Didn't have a plan. Just needed distance. Needed to feel like she had some control over her own fate. But the forest at night was different. From the forest by day, the trees closed in around her. Shadows shifted and moved. Every sound became a threat. She thought she knew which direction led down the mountain. But in the darkness, everything looked the same. She stopped, tried to get her bearings. Her breath came in ragged gasps. That's when she heard it. A howl, low and long. Somewhere off to her left, then another. Closer, off to her right, wolves. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. More howls joined the first two. They were circling. She could hear them moving through the underbrush, see shadows slipping between the trees. She'd been so stupid, so reckless. The wolves moved closer. She could see their eyes now, reflecting the moonlight, yellow-green, unblinking. A twig snapped behind her. She spun around. Then came the gunshot. The crack of the rifle split the night. Loud enough to make her ears ring, the wolves scattered, vanished into the darkness like smoke. Footsteps crunched through the pine needles. A lantern appeared, warm light cutting through the shadows. Gideon emerged from the trees, rifle in one hand, lantern in the other. He was barefoot, wearing just his pants and an undershirt. He must have run straight from his bed when he realized she was gone. "You hurt?" His voice was level, calm, no anger in it, just concern. Delilah shook her head. She couldn't speak. Her whole body was shaking. From cold, from fear, from shame at her own foolishness. Gideon lowered the rifle, set down the lantern, pulled a blanket from around his shoulders. He'd grabbed it on his way out, wrapped it around her. Cold night, to be wandering. "Let's get you home," that word. Home. She followed him back through the forest. He moved with sure feet, knew every tree, every rock. The path back to the cabin appeared, like he'd carved it out of the darkness himself. When they reached the cabin, he made her tea, strong and sweet, made her sit by the fire, until the shaking stopped. Then he spoke. "You're not a prisoner here, Delilah." It was the first time he'd used her name. "But these mountains are dangerous, especially at night. Next time you want to leave, next time you need to leave, you tell me. I'll take you wherever you want to go." She looked up at him, searched his face for the lie, for the trick, but there was nothing there except steady truth. "I mean it," he said. "You can walk down that mountain tomorrow morning, if you choose. I won't stop you, but I'd rather you stayed. At least through the summer. Give yourself time to heal, then decide." "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Why did you take me?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. His eyes went distant, focused on something she couldn't see, "Because someone needed to," he said finally, "and I had the means." It wasn't the whole truth. She knew that, but it was all he was willing to give right now. And somehow that was enough. 5 days later, while cleaning the main room, Delilah found herself studying the worn Bible on the shelf. She'd noticed it before. But today, curiosity got the better of her. She pulled it down. The leather was soft with age, cracked at the corners. The pages were thin, well used. Some had notes in the margins, in careful handwriting. She opened the front cover, an inscription in faded ink, "To Reverend Gideon Maddox, with gratitude from your congregation at First Methodist Church of Lawrence, Kansas. May God's word guide your steps. 1859. Delilah's breath caught. Reverend? Gideon had been a preacher? The pieces started rearranging themselves in her mind. The Bible, the quiet dignity, the way he moved through the world. With a kind of moral certainty, even his speech patterns, measured, careful, like someone used to choosing words that mattered. She heard his boots on the porch. Quickly put the Bible back, not before he stepped inside, and saw her near the shelf. His eyes went to the Bible, then to her face. "You were a preacher," she said. Not a question, a statement. Gideon went very still. That same frozen pond look from before. "Was," he said. His voice was rough. "Long time ago, what happened?" "War happened." He walked to the window, stared out at the mountains, lost everything that mattered. Couldn't stand in front of a congregation after that. Couldn't speak words. About a God who'd let it all burn. His hand gripped the window frame, knuckles white. Then, for just 30 seconds, his eyes went somewhere else. Somewhere terrible. Delilah saw it flash across his face. Fire. Screaming. Hands reaching through smoke. A horror so deep. It had carved permanent lines around his eyes. Then he blinked, came back, looked at her. With that careful, controlled expression. "Some doors close, and don't open again," he said. "That's just how it is." Left her standing there, with more questions than before. That night she dreamed of fire, of a small church with dark windows, of smoke rising into a merciless sky. She didn't know why. Couldn't have known. But somehow she'd touched the edge of his wound. The next afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats pulled them both outside. A woman rode into the yard on a sturdy brown mare. She looked to be in her 50s. Silver-streaked hair bound back in a practical braid. She wore a simple dress and carried saddlebags that clinked with glass jars. "Miss Josie," Gideon said. Something like relief crossed his face. "Didn't expect you for another week. Thought I'd bring these dried mint and preserves early." The woman dismounted with practiced ease. Her sharp eyes found Delilah, standing uncertainly by the cabin door. And who might this be? Gideon drew Miss Josie aside. They spoke in low voices for several minutes. Delilah couldn't hear their words, but she saw the woman's expression shift, from concern to understanding, from wariness to something softer. After their discussion, Miss Josie approached Delilah with a warm smile. "Come help me unpack these jars, child," as they worked. Miss Josie spoke quietly. "I'm a midwife." Travel these mountains delivering babies, tending the sick. I've known Gideon Maddox for 15 years. She paused, met Delilah's eyes. He's a good man. Life dealt him some hard blows, but you're safe as a spring daisy here. Make no mistake about that. How do you know? Delilah whispered. Because I found him half dead on this mountain once, right after he came up here. After Kansas, after the war, after she trailed off. He was more dead than alive. But he never once raised a hand in anger. Not to me. Not to anyone. His demons turn inward, not outward. You understand? Delilah nodded slowly. Something tight in her chest loosened just a fraction. He doesn't talk about it, Miss Josie continued. The past. But it's there, heavy on him. You'll see it sometimes in his eyes. A grief so deep. It has no bottom. Before Josie left, she examined Delilah with a midwife's practiced eye, checked her arms for bruises, asked quiet questions, made sure she was eating enough, sleeping well. No signs of harm, Josie said to Gideon. Before she mounted her horse, signs of healing instead. You keep on like you're doing. After she rode away, Delilah felt something shift inside her. External confirmation, a witness. Someone else who vouched for Gideon's character. Maybe this strange sanctuary was real after all. 3 weeks into her stay, Delilah found the injured hawk. She was checking the chicken coop for eggs when she heard it, a sharp cry. Distressed. She followed the sound. To the corner of the building, tangled in a mass of old baling twine, lay a red-tailed hawk, beautiful, fierce, one wing twisted at an awkward angle. Its sharp eyes watched her approach. Fear and defiance mixed in equal measure. Easy now, Delilah whispered. She moved slowly, carefully. I'm not going to hurt you. She shrugged off her shawl, approached the hawk with the same gentleness she'd learned from watching Gideon with the goats, talking soft, moving steady. The hawk made no sound. As she carefully wrapped the shawl around its body, mindful of the sharp beak, the talons, it weighed less than she expected. All feathers and hollow bones. And coiled strength, Mr. Maddox, she called, tried to keep her voice steady. I need help. Gideon emerged from his workshop, sawdust coating his sleeves. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the hawk in her arms, but he didn't hesitate. Bring it to the table. Together they worked to free the bird. From the twine, Gideon's hands were gentle, as he showed Delilah how to hold the hawk still, while he examined the injured wing. Not broken, he muttered. Just strained and scratched up some. They cleaned the wing, with water and herbs, bound it carefully. With strips of clean clown cloth, the hawks remained surprisingly calm, under their ministrations, as if it sensed their intent to help. When they finished, Delilah stroked one finger along the bird's sleek head. You're like that bird, Gideon said quietly, his voice rough with something. That might have been emotion. Still got flight in you. Over the next few days, Delilah tended to the hawk, kept it in a makeshift pen on the porch, where it could see the sky, brought it fresh water, bits of meat, watched as it grew stronger day by day. Sometimes she caught Gideon observing her, care of the bird, an expression on his face she couldn't quite read, something like recognition, like he saw himself in what she was doing, healing the wounded, giving them time, patience, space to mend. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. At the mountain cabin, each morning Delilah rose with the sun, pulled on her worn boots, made her way to the goat pen. The animals quickly grew to know her, pressed their soft heads against the fence. When they heard her approach, their eager bleats became familiar, comforting even. She found comfort in their eager bleats and the warm weight of their bodies. As she milked them, the chicken coop became another morning constant. Delilah discovered she enjoyed gathering eggs, reaching carefully under warm feathered bodies to collect the smooth brown treasures. Sometimes she would pause, watch the hens scratch and peck in their yard, their movements purposeful and unhurried in the garden, as spring was awakening the soil. Gideon showed her how to turn the earth with a spade, breaking up the winter-hardened ground. Her muscles ached at first, but grew stronger with each passing day. When she successfully planted her first row of peas, pressing each seed into the dark soil with careful fingers, she caught Gideon nodding approvingly. From across the yard, the mountain air felt different, from the dusty cattle town below. Up here, the breeze carried the scent of pine and wild sage. Even the sunlight seemed cleaner, filtering through the trees in gentle rays. Delilah found herself breathing deeper. her shoulders gradually releasing their tight hold. One afternoon, while sweeping the wooden floor of her loft, Delilah's broom caught on something. Under an old wool blanket, tucked against the wall, she knelt down, pulled back the blanket, made of dark wood. Its brass fittings dulled with age. A heavy lock held the lid firmly closed. Her fingers traced the intricate carvings. On the lid, flowers and vines, woven together in a beautiful pattern. Something about the trunk made her heart beat faster with curiosity. But this was Gideon's home. She had no right to pry. She carefully replaced the blanket, covered the trunk again, but questions lingered in her mind, like smoke. Why would a man choose such solitude? What secrets did that locked trunk hold? The afternoon running elk arrived. The hawk had just begun testing its wing. Delilah was so focused on the bird that she almost missed the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up. An older man rode into the yard on a paint horse. He had long silver braids, deep lines around his eyes. He wore a mix of traditional Ute clothing and practical trail gear. His presence commanded immediate respect. Gideon stepped out of the cabin. His whole posture changed. Tension, not fear. Something else. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Then the elder dismounted, walked forward, opened his arms. Brother, Gideon embraced him, held on longer than Delilah expected. When they pulled apart, both men's eyes were bright. Many moons have passed, the elder said. Too many. Running Elk. Gideon's voice was thick with emotion. Running Elk turned to Delilah. His dark eyes were kind, knowing. Welcome, young one. You are safe here. He spoke a string of musical words. In Ute, Gideon responded haltingly, his pronunciation rough but sincere. Running Elk smiled. Then he said to Delilah in English, Come, sit with us. There are stories to share. They settled around the fire that evening. Running Elk had brought dried meat and herbs as gifts. Delilah helped prepare the meal, while the two men talked in low voices, mixing Ute and English, catching up on years of separation. After they ate, Delilah found courage. She didn't know she had. How do you know, Mr. Maddox? Running Elk looked to Gideon. A silent question. Permission? Gideon's face went tight, but after a long moment, he nodded, heavy, resigned. Running Elk's voice was gentle but clear. I was there the day his world burned. The words hung in the air. Like smoke, the church, Running Elk continued, in Kansas. During the war, I heard the screams, saw the smoke rising. I was in town to trade. I ran toward the fire. Delilah's breath caught. She knew, somehow she already knew, where this was going. The doors were barred from outside, Running Elk said. His voice carried the weight of old grief, flames. They were already too high. I tried to break through, but the wood was too thick. The fire fought. Too hot? He paused, looked at Gideon. The mountain man sat very still, staring into the fire, his jaw clenched. Then he came, Running Elk said. Running, screaming names, Sarah, Joseph. He tried to go inside, tried to break through the burning doors. I had to pull him back, had to hold him, while the church, he didn't finish. Didn't need to, Sarah, my sister's daughter, and her son, Joseph. They were inside. 23 souls lost at her mouth. Dilla's hand flew to Sarah, walking star, a Ute woman, Gideon's wife, Joseph, their son, dead in a church fire, doors barred, trapped. I pulled him from the ruins, Running Elk said. Held him while he fought me. While he tried to go back in, while he broke. I couldn't save them, but I could save him. That is why I stand with him today, why my people welcome him. He is brother. He is family. The silence that followed was profound. Delilah looked at Gideon, really looked at him, saw the man beneath the quiet exterior, saw the weight he carried. Every single day, lost his wife, his child, his faith, everything that mattered, and he'd come to these mountains to die or to hide or both. Then the world shifted. Delilah saw it, not with her eyes, but in her mind, clear as day. A small church on the Kansas prairie. White clapboard, simple, pure, people streaming out. Its Sunday service just ended. Women in their best dresses, men in clean shirts, children running ahead, laughing among them. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes, Ute features, beautiful, holding the hand of a small boy, maybe 5 years old. His father's chin, his mother's eyes. They're the last to leave. Sarah wants to arrange the hymnals, make sure everything is tidy. For next week, then men on horseback, riding hard, angry voices, Indian lover, traitor to your race, harboring enemies. The doors slam shut. A wooden beam shoved across, the scratch of matches, smoke rising. Inside, Sarah's scream, pounding on the doors, Joseph crying, other voices joining, trapped, terrified, fire climbing the walls, hungry, merciless, and Gideon, riding from the neighboring farm where he'd stayed to help. A sick family, seeing the smoke, hearing the screams, running too late, always too late, hands on the burning doors, skin blistering, running elk pulling him back, holding him, both of them helpless, watching everything burn. Afterward, the silence, the ashes, two blanket-wrapped bodies, one tall, one small, Gideon's world ending. In smoke and grief, the vision faded. Delilah was crying. She hadn't realized tears were streaming down her face. Gideon stood abruptly, walked outside without a word. Running elk placed a weathered hand on Delilah's shoulder. He does not speak of it. Pain is too deep. But now you know. Now you understand why this mountain, why the silence, why he lives apart from the world. That took everything. Why did he save me? Delilah whispered. Why take me in when he's already carrying so much? Running Elk smiled sadly because he could not save them, but he could save you. Sometimes we survive our grief by preventing others from drowning in theirs. Delilah found Gideon by the stream, standing in the moonlight, silent tears tracking through his beard. She didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort him. With empty words, she just sat down beside him on the cold ground, close enough that he knew he wasn't alone, far enough that he had space. For his grief, they sat there until the moon crossed half the sky, and something shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a recognition. They were both survivors of cruelty, both carrying wounds that would never fully heal. But maybe they could carry them together, make the weight a little lighter. By sharing it, when Gideon finally stood, he offered her his hand, pulled her to her feet. Thank you, he said quietly. She didn't ask what for. She knew, for sitting with him in his pain, for not running from his grief, for seeing his worst wound and not turning away. They walked back to the cabin together, side by side, and Delilah understood something fundamental. Gideon hadn't bought her to use her. He'd bought her to save her, the same way Running Elk had saved him, the same way humans have always saved each other, by showing up, by staying, by refusing to let darkness have the final word. That night, she slept deeper than she had since arriving. At the mountain, the nightmares didn't come. For the first time, she felt truly safe, not because nothing could hurt her here, because she finally understood the man who'd given her sanctuary. He knew what it meant to lose everything. And he decided, somewhere in the depths of his grief, that he wouldn't let it happen to someone else. If he could prevent it, even a broken man could still offer shelter. Even a wounded soul could still give comfort. Maybe, especially then, 3 days after Running Elk's visit. Miss Josie's wagon rattled up the mountain path again, but this time she carried news of a different sort. As they sat on the porch, drinking mint tea, she turned to Gideon. With a gentle smile, Running Elk asked after you. At the trading post. The summer gathering starts tomorrow evening. He hopes you might come. Gideon's shoulders tensed. He stared into his tin cup like he was searching for answers. In the steaming liquid, a long time since I attended. All the more reason to go, Josie pressed. She glanced at Delilah. The girl could learn something too. Running Elk's people have always been kind. To outsiders who come with respect, Delilah's heart quickened. She'd seen Ute traders in Whetstone from afar, but her father had always pulled her away. Muttering harsh words under his breath, Gideon remained silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Reckon we could make the journey. If Delilah's willing, I'd like to go, Delilah said softly. The words surprised her, but they were true. They spent the remainder of the day preparing. Gideon showed Delilah how to pack their saddlebags with dried meat, cornbread, and small gifts of tobacco and coffee. Guests never come empty-handed to such gatherings, he explained. It's about respect, about recognizing the generosity of your hosts. The next morning they set out. Before dawn, Delilah rode the gentle mare Gideon had been training her on. Over the past weeks, he led the way. On his sturdy gelding, the trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, climbing higher, before descending into hidden valleys. Delilah's thighs ached from the long ride, but she didn't complain. As the sun began to set, they heard it, distant drum beats, echoing through the trees, a rhythm older than the mountains themselves. Gideon led them down into a sheltered valley. Dozens of lodges stood in a circle. Fires danced between them. The air was rich with the smell of cooking meat and wood smoke. Children ran past, laughing and pointing at the newcomers. Women in bright shawls moved between the fires, stirring large pots. Delilah's nervousness returned. All these people, all these eyes. What if they judged her the way Whetstone had? An elderly man with long silver braids approached them, running elk. His face creased into a warm smile. "Brother," he embraced Gideon, then turned to Delilah. "Welcome, young one. Come, you will help with the evening meal. There are stories to be heard there." Delilah looked questioningly at Gideon. He nodded encouragingly. She made her way to where the women were working. A woman with laugh lines around her eyes handed her a wooden spoon, showed her how to stir the thick stew. Another woman began teaching her the names of the herbs they used, speaking slowly so Delilah could understand. As the evening deepened, more people gathered around the fires. Children played games with painted stones, their shouts of laughter mixing with the steady drum beats. Elders told stories that made everyone chuckle, though Delilah couldn't understand all the words. Young men and women danced in circles, their feet moving in practice patterns. Their beaded clothing caught the firelight, spun it into something magical from her place. By the cooking fire, Delilah watched Gideon. He sat with Running Elk and other older men. Though he spoke little, his posture was laxed. Occasionally he would nod or gesture as they talked. No one here looked at him with fear or suspicion. Instead, they treated him like a long-lost relative. Finally returned home, the woman beside her, who had introduced herself as Singing Bird, noticed Delilah's attention. "Your father," she said in careful English, nodding toward Gideon. "He was a good friend to our people. Before the great sadness, as the moon rose over the valley, casting silver light through the trees, Delilah felt something she hadn't known was possible. Peace, belonging, acceptance without judgment or condition. Dawn broke over the valley. In ribbons of pink and gold, Delilah woke to the sound of women singing as they prepared breakfast after a meal of cornmeal mush sweetened with wild berries. Running Elk beckoned Gideon and Delilah to join him near his lodge. He sat cross-legged on a woven blanket, his weathered hands, carefully preparing a long-stemmed pipe. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the blanket. "Share breath and story." With an old man, Delilah settled beside Gideon, watched as Running Elk packed the pipe bowl with tobacco. The elder's movements were deliberate, almost like a prayer. He lit the pipe with a twig from the morning fire, drew deeply, then passed it to Gideon. "The smoke carries our words to the Creator," Running Elk explained to Delilah. "It makes a path for truth to travel." He studied her face. "For a long moment, I see something in you, young one, like embers waiting for wind." Gideon took his turn with the pipe, passed it back to Running Elk. The old man nodded thoughtfully. "Your spirit," Running Elk continued. "It reminds me of the small fires we keep through winter, not blazing yet, but holding warmth, waiting." He spoke a string of musical words, in Ute, then translated, "Little fire who waits." "That is your name among us?" Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever given her a name that held such meaning, such promise. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Running Elk placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. They rode back to the cabin. 2 days later, Delilah carried her new name like a precious gift, turned it over in her mind. Little fire who waits. She was waiting. For what, she didn't quite know yet, but the name felt true, felt right. Gideon seemed lighter, too. The gathering had done something for him, reminded him he still had people, still had connection, even in his grief and isolation. 7 weeks into her stay. On the mountain, a summer storm rolled in without warning. Dark clouds gathered over the peaks. Like a heavy wool blanket, thunder cracked overhead as rain pelted the cabin's roof. They were trapped inside for 3 days. Delilah found herself settling into the close quarters more easily than she expected. The first morning of their confinement, she noticed a pile of Gideon's shirts that needed mending. She picked up a worn blue work shirt, found comfort in the familiar task of threading a needle. Her father had never allowed her to fix his clothes, claimed her stitches weren't neat enough. But Gideon nodded gratefully when she offered as she worked. The steady drum of rain against the windows keeping time with her needle. Gideon did something unexpected. He reached for the leather-bound Bible that sat on the shelf, opened it carefully, as if handling something, both precious and dangerous. Then he began to read aloud. His voice was rough, hesitant, lacking the confident delivery one might expect. From a former preacher, he stumbled over familiar verses, had to clear his throat. Several times, used to know these words better, he muttered, almost to himself, but he kept reading. The Psalms, words about comfort in darkness, about hope in the valley of shadows. Delilah listened as she sewed, noted how his fingers trembled, slightly when turning the pages the second day of the storm. Brought an unexpected visitor while Delilah was stirring. A pot of beans, a loud clatter at the door made her jump. One of the young goats had escaped its shelter, pushed its way into the cabin. It stood there dripping and bleeding, looking entirely pleased with itself, tracking mud across the floor for the first time since arriving at the cabin. Delilah laughed. The sound surprised her, clear and genuine, echoing off the wooden walls. Even Gideon's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. They worked together to escort the determined creature back outside, getting soaked in the process, but somehow it felt good, real, like a moment of lightness, breaking through heavy clouds when the storm finally cleared, leaving puddles and fresh green shoots in its wake. The air felt different, lighter, like something had been washed clean that evening as they sat in their usual quiet spots by the fire. Gideon stood abruptly. His face was serious, determined. "There's something I need to show you," he said. He led her up the ladder to her loft, went to the corner where the trunk sat hidden beneath its blanket. He pulled the blanket back, stared at the trunk for a long moment, then pulled a key. From his pocket, the lock clicked open, the lid lifted with a soft creak. Cedar scent wafted out, sweet and sad at the same time. Inside, carefully folded clothes, small ones, a child's things, a toy wooden horse, beautifully carved, worn smooth by small hands. Gideon lifted it out, his fingers trembling. "My son Joseph," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He loved this horse, carried it everywhere. Deeper in the trunk, a woman's shawl, deep blue with intricate beadwork, Ute patterns woven with love and skill. "Sarah Walking Star," Gideon said. "My wife? Running Elk's sister's daughter. She made this the winter before." He couldn't finish. Beneath the shawl, a photograph, carefully protected in oilcloth. Gideon unwrapped it with reverent hands. The image showed a younger Gideon, smiling, his arm around a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes, Ute features at their feet. A small boy, maybe 5 years old, grinning at the camera, the wooden horse clutched in his hand, a family happy, whole. Before the fire took everything, Delilah's throat tightened. This was what he'd lost. This was the weight he carried every single day. But Gideon wasn't finished. He reached deeper, into the trunk, pulled out a leather folder, official-looking papers inside. "Read this," he said, handed it to her. Delilah unfolded the document. Her eyes scanned the words: adoption agreement, adoptive parents, Reverend Gideon Maddox, and Sarah Walking Star Maddox, child, female, approximately 6 years of age, orphaned in wagon train attack near Lawrence, Kansas. Date of placement: April 17, 1863, 1 week before the fire. Delilah looked up at Gideon, confusion and understanding warring in her mind. "We never got to meet her," Gideon said, his voice breaking. "Sarah wanted to show. That love crosses all lines. White, Ute, didn't matter. We were going to raise her with Joseph, teach them both languages, both ways, show them that family. Isn't about blood. It's about choice, about love." He took a shaky breath. "Then everything burned, the church, Sarah, Joseph, all of it. I never knew what happened to that little girl. If someone else took her in, if she survived, if she found a home." His eyes met Delilah's, raw with emotion. "But when I saw you on those steps, sold like property, unwanted, cast aside, I saw her, I saw the child. We never got to save, and I couldn't let it happen again. Couldn't stand by and watch another girl be discarded, not if I had the means to stop it." Tears streamed down Delilah's face. She understood now. Understood everything. She wasn't random charity, wasn't a convenient servant, wasn't a transaction. She was the fulfillment of Sarah's dream, the completion of a promise made years ago, the child they'd wanted to save, but never got the chance. "Can I call you Pa?" The words came out. before she could stop them. Gideon's eyes filled with tears, spilled over into his beard. "I'd be honored, daughter," they embraced, for the first time. Her father's hugs had always hurt, crushing, meant to remind her how small and worthless she was. This one healed, strong but gentle, safe, the embrace of someone who'd chosen her, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because she was worth saving. They stood there in the loft, holding each other, two broken people, finding wholeness in their shared wounds. The peace lasted 3 more weeks, then one afternoon. In late summer, they returned from morning chores to find a piece of paper. Nailed to the cabin door, sheriff's seal. Official looking. Gideon pulled it down. "Read it." His jaw tightened. "Jed Boone arriving next week. Demands return of daughter." Sheriff Wells, Delilah's blood turned to ice. "I won't go back," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I won't. You won't," Gideon agreed, his voice steady. Final, but over the following days, Miss Josie brought troubling news. Jed had been in Whetstone for 2 weeks, spreading stories, ugly rumors about why Gideon was keeping a young girl up on the mountain, shameful things that decent folks shouldn't repeat. Sheriff was listening, more than listening, taking notes, building a case. Delilah felt sick. She thought of Gideon's unfailing respect, his careful distance, the way he'd given her space to heal and grow. The idea that anyone could twist that into something dark made her furious. People needed to know the truth. "Before Pa comes," she said to Gideon. One evening, he looked up at her use of Pa. Something soft crossed his face. "Then tell them," he said simply. That night, Delilah pulled out her notebook, the one where she'd been sketching flowers and mountains. She turned to a blank page, picked up her pencil, and she began to write, not as Delilah Boone, but as Mary Grace. A name that couldn't be traced to her, a name that would protect her. Until the right moment, she wrote the truth. All of it, the public sale, the journey, the sanctuary, the kindness, the healing. She wrote about a broken preacher who'd lost his family, about a discarded girl who'd found worth, about how family is built by choice, about how sometimes the monsters wear respectable faces and the saviors live alone. In the mountains, she wrote through the night. Gideon read it at dawn, his eyes moving slowly. "Over each word, every word true?" he asked when he finished. "Every single word? Then we send it." Miss Josie took the pages to Denver, to the newspaper office, promised to get them to the editor, but they all knew it might not be enough. Words on paper versus a father's legal rights, truth versus the law's blind spots. 2 days later, Tom Wheeler rode up the mountain. First time the store owner had ever made the journey. His face was troubled. "Jed's hired Sheriff Cole," he said. "They're coming next week with papers claiming kidnapping, moral indecency." He looked ashamed. "I wanted to warn you. Should have stopped the sale that day. I'm sorry, you're here now," Gideon said. That counts. After Tom left, they prepared, not with weapons. Gideon didn't sharpen his axe for violence, didn't clean his rifle for a fight. Instead, they gathered a list, names of everyone who'd witnessed the sale, everyone who could testify to the truth. Running Elk rode up that evening. "My people will stand with you," he promised. "The treaty protects this land, and we protect our family." They were building a defense, not of violence, but of truth, of community, of voices united against injustice. Delilah felt something growing inside her. Not fear, not this time, determination. She'd found her voice, found her worth, found her family, and she wasn't going to let Jed Boone take any of it away. The storm was coming. She could feel it, like the pressure before thunder, the stillness before lightning. But this time, she wouldn't cower, wouldn't make herself small, wouldn't disappear. This time, she would stand and speak and fight for the life she'd built in these mountains. Little fire who waits was done waiting. It was time to burn. They came at dawn. The dust cloud appeared on the trail just as the sun was breaking over the eastern peaks. Delilah spotted it first, from the garden where she'd been gathering early beans. Her hands froze mid-task. The basket dropped to her feet. "They're coming," she called out, her voice trembling. Despite her resolve, Gideon emerged from the barn, wiping his hands. On his worn leather vest, he followed her gaze to the approaching riders. His expression went still, calm, like he'd been expecting this, preparing for it. Miss Josie stepped onto the porch. She'd stayed the past few nights, knowing the confrontation was close, Her medicine bag hung at her side, ready for whatever came. Two riders appeared first, then a wagon. Delilah's heart clenched as she recognized her father's straight-back posture, the glint of a sheriff's badge. In the morning light, the horses thundered into the yard, spraying dirt and pebbles. Jed Boone jumped down before his mount had fully stopped. Behind him, Sheriff Cole dismounted, more slowly. His badge was crooked, on his vest, his eyes sharp, with something that wasn't justice. A deputy followed, rifle across his saddle, looking uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure this was right, but didn't have the courage to say so. "There's my wayward girl." Jed's voice cut across the yard, sharp as broken glass, living in sin. With a mountain hermit, Gideon stepped between them. "The girl's low and safe here. No sin. No harm." Sheriff Cole pulled a folded paper from his vest, made a show of unfolding it, reading from it like it was Holy Writ. "Got here papers. Saying different. Says you took her against the law. Says you've been keeping her. Improper-like." He looked up, smiled without warmth. "That's kidnapping, Maddox. And worse, that's a lie." Delilah moved forward, her face flushed with anger. Years of silence breaking, like a dam. "He saved me. When you sold me, Pa, like I was nothing but cattle, like I was worth less." Then flour and a rifle, the crack of Jed's hand across her face, echoed against the cabin walls. Delilah stumbled backward, holding her cheek, the sting of it, bringing tears to her eyes, not from pain, from rage, from the injustice of it all. Miss Josie rushed to her side. Gideon's hands became fists, every muscle in his body straining to hold back. But he didn't move, didn't strike. Knew that violence would only hurt Delilah's case. A sound from the tree line made them all turn. Running Elk stepped out of the forest, calm, dignified. He'd been watching, waiting. His presence commanded immediate attention. "These mountains fall under treaty lands," he said, his English clear and deliberate. "Your valley laws have no power here." Sheriff Cole's face reddened. "Now see here, Indian." "I see very well," Running Elk interrupted, his voice like stone. "I see a father who throws away his child. I see a lawman who twists truth for coin. And I see a good man who offers shelter." To the wounded, Jed stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. "This ain't your business. All injustice is my business," Running Elk replied. "These slopes have witnessed too many broken promises." The sheriff's patience snapped. He drew his pistol, pointed it first at Running Elk, then at Gideon. "That's enough talk, Maddox. You're under arrest for kidnapping and moral indecency. The girl goes home with her No, Delilah tried to run to Gideon, but Jed grabbed her arm, roughly, the same bruising grip. From that day in town, the sheriff approached with handcuffs. Gideon stood silent, met Delilah's eyes, across the space between them, offered no resistance. As the cold metal closed around his wrists, he knew that fighting would make it worse, that the only way through this was truth and law, not violence. "Get in the wagon, girl," Jed ordered, driving Delilah toward his waiting rig. "This isn't right," Josie protested, but the deputy had arrived, training his rifle on anyone who might interfere. Delilah's tears fell freely as she was forced into the wagon's hard seat. She watched helplessly as the sheriff led Gideon to his own horse, bound the reins to the saddle horn, made sure he couldn't escape. "The truth will come out," Gideon called to her, his voice strong, despite his bonds. "Stay strong, child." Running Elk raised his hand in farewell. A promise in the gesture. "We will not forget," he said. While Josie nodded firmly, beside him the wagon lurched forward, beginning the long descent toward Whetstone. Delilah twisted around and watched through her tears as the cabin grew smaller, the place where she had finally found peace. Now fading into the mountain mist, ahead lay the town jail, where Gideon would be locked away, and her father's ranch, where old wounds waited to reopen. The last thing she saw before the trail bent away was Miss Josie and Running Elk, standing like sentinels in the yard, their faces set with determination, whatever came next. She knew she wasn't alone in this fight, but knowing didn't make the separation hurt any less. The bunkhouse hadn't changed. Same rough planks, same musty straw mattress, same small window with iron bars that Jed had installed years ago to keep her from. Midnight wandering, Delilah huddled on the thin blanket as darkness settled over the ranch. The lock clicked heavily in the door, just like old times, just like she'd never left. But she had left, and she wasn't the same girl. Annie Moore's sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by the howling of distant coyotes, by the weight of dread in her stomach, by memories of her father's hand. Across her face, when dawn finally painted the eastern sky, she heard boots on the porch, keys rattling. "Make yourself presentable," Jed ordered, throwing a freshly pressed dress. Through the doorway, "Church starts in an hour." The dress was stiff, too tight, clearly bought for a smaller girl. Delilah struggled with the buttons, her fingers trembling through the window. She watched ranch hands pause their morning chores to stare, their whispers carried across the yard. She could imagine what they were saying. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the ranch yard, Lila heard soft footsteps. Outside the bunkhouse, a key turned in the lock. Not her father's key. Miss Josie's familiar face appeared in the doorway. "Quick now, child. We're getting you somewhere safe." Until the hearing, they slipped through the darkness to where Widow Tollant, the quiet sister of the church pianist, waited with her wagon. Hidden behind the barn, the older woman helped Delilah up without a word, covered her with a quilt. "2 days," Josie murmured as they pulled away. "From the ranch, the circuit judge. We'll hear everything then. Running Elk's gone to fetch Gideon. From the jail in Whetstone, your father may have friends in the valley. But we have truth. On our side, Widow Tallant's house sat on the edge of town, its windows warm, with lamplight. Inside, the woman finally spoke, her voice gentle. "Your room's ready upstairs, dear." "No locked doors here." Delilah climbed the stairs, find a real bed, a clean quilt, a washing basin, with fresh water, a small desk by the window. On the desk lay her drawing papers and charcoal sticks, from the cabin, somehow rescued and brought here. She touched the familiar materials with trembling fingers, remembering the peace of mountain mornings when Gideon had first encouraged her art. But wait, she remembered something from the cabin. When Gideon had opened the trunk, there had been a small wooden box. At the very bottom, he'd said it was there. When he bought the cabin, never opened it. And this cabin, her mother's family cabin. Before she married Jed, Delilah's eyes widened. She frantically searched her old room, the one she'd been locked in, behind the loose board, where she used to hide her drawings. She pried it up. Behind it, a small wooden box, twin to the one at Gideon's cabin. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, a letter in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Delilah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. Your father wasn't always this way. War and loss changed him. But that's no excuse. Listen to me, daughter. You are not what he says you are. You are bright, kind, talented. When you draw, I see God's light in you. One day you'll be old enough to leave. When that day comes, don't look back. Find someone who sees you the way I see you. Find a place where your light isn't called darkness. You were never the problem, my darling. You were always the answer. I hid these letters. One here, one at my family's old cabin, that we had to sell, if you ever find either. No, you were always meant for more. Mama." Delilah clutched the letter, tears streaming down her face. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. Her mother's family cabin was Gideon's cabin. Her mother had lived there as a girl, had blessed that mountain with her presence, with her prayers. 2 boxes, 2 letters, both waiting for Delilah. To find her way home, Mama knew, Delilah whispered. Somehow she knew I'd need to find my way. Back to that mountain, the letter gave her strength. 2 mothers, both loving her, both guiding her path, even from beyond the grave. Tomorrow she would face her father in court. Tomorrow she would speak words that couldn't be unspoken. But tonight, she held her mother's letter like a talisman, a reminder of who she was and who she was meant to become. The morning of the hearing, Delilah woke before dawn. Widow Tallant had laid out a clean dress, simple but dignified. Not the tight, uncomfortable thing Jed had forced on her as she dressed. She tucked her mother's letter into her pocket, where she could touch it. For strength downstairs, Miss Josie was already there, with Tom Wheeler and Sarah Mills and 3 other townsfolk who had witnessed the sale. "We're all coming," Tom said, his hat in his hands. "Should have spoken up that day in spring. We're speaking up now." Running Elk arrived. Just as the sun was rising, behind him, on a second horse, rode Gideon, no longer in handcuffs. Running Elk had secured his release. Until the hearing, Delilah ran to him. Gideon dismounted, caught her in his arms. "Stay strong, daughter," he said. "Truth will prevail." "I have something to show you," Delilah said. She pulled out the letter. Mama left me letters. In both places. Your cabin was her family's cabin. She knew, Pa. Somehow she knew. Gideon read the letter, his eyes filling with tears. "She blessed that place," he said softly. "Before we ever met, your mother's prayers were already there." Waiting for you, they rode to the town hall together, a small procession of truth-tellers and witnesses. The hall was already packed. Half of Whetstone had turned out to see what would happen. Jed Boone sat in the front row, Sheriff Cole beside him. Both men looked confident, like they'd already won, but they hadn't seen the crowd gathering outside. More people arriving every minute. The Denver newspaper had published Delilah's article yesterday under the headline, "The Girl Who Was Sold and the Preacher Who Saved Her." Everyone had read it. Everyone knew the truth now. Judge Harrison entered, a stern-faced man with silver at his temples. He called the hearing to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "This court will hear testimony regarding the custody dispute between Jed Boone and Gideon Maddox concerning one Delilah Boone." His voice carried to the rafters. Delilah sat straight-backed between Miss Josie and Widow Tollant, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Gideon was brought to sit at the front table. Their eyes met. Across the room, he gave her a small nod. "Be strong." She nodded back. "I will." "Sheriff Cole," the judge said, "present your evidence." The sheriff swaggered forward, producing a leather folder. "With theatrical flourish, Your Honor, I have here documents proving Mr. Boone never legally surrendered custody of his minor daughter." He spread several papers across the judge's desk. "These show his continued guardianship and right to reclaim her." Delilah's heart sank as she watched the judge examine the papers. Miss Josie squeezed her hand, then stood, her skirts rustling. As she approached the bench, "Your Honor, I present the town newspaper from last week." Josie handed over the folded paper, the one with Delilah's article, piece written by the girl herself, under the pen name Mary Grace, describing the public sale that took place on the steps of Wheeler's General Store. This past spring, Tom Wheeler stood up from his place near the back. "I witnessed that sale myself, Your Honor." Jed Boone traded his daughter for a Winchester rifle and 3 sacks of flour, called her unfit for ranch life. Made quite a spectacle of it. Sarah Mills and 2 other townspeople nodded vigorously, adding their voices. To confirm Wheeler's account, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jed's face darkened. That was no legal sale. Just a lesson meant to frighten some sense into an ungrateful child. A lesson? Widow Tallant's quiet voice cut through his bluster. She rose slowly, her black silk dress rustling. "Mr. Boone, I've watched you parade your daughter's shame through our church, seen you lock her away like an animal. What lesson does that teach? Except cruelty?" The widow's words landed like stones in still water. Several women in the crowd nodded. Even the judge's expression shifted before Jed could respond. Running Elk stepped forward. The Ute elder moved with quiet dignity, carrying a leather tube. "That drew all eyes. I present treaty documents," he said, his English clear and measured, "signed by territorial governor and tribal council." He carefully unrolled the papers on a side table. The judge leaned forward with interest. "This land where Gideon Maddox lives, it is protected territory. Jed Boone's cattle grazing rights were never valid there. He has no legal authority over that mountain or anyone who dwells there." The judge adjusted his spectacles, studying the treaty maps and signatures with growing interest. Sheriff Cole shifted uncomfortably, his forged documents suddenly looking flimsy. In comparison, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Delilah felt hope rising in her chest. The truth was coming out, one piece at a time, and the walls around her father's lies were starting to crumble. Furthermore, Running Elk continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, "Gideon Maddox is known to our people as a man of honor." He paused, met the judge's eyes directly. "I know his character because I was there. I witnessed the church fire. That took his family. I tried to break down the doors. I failed, but I pulled him from the ruins when he tried to run back. For his wife and son, I held him. While he broke, the courtroom went silent. You could hear breathing, the creak of benches, nothing else. Sarah Walking Star was my sister's daughter," Running Elk said, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. She and her son Joseph died that day, along with 21 others, doors barred from outside, burned alive. Because hatred feared their love, he turned to look at Gideon, then back to the judge. I failed to save them, but I saved him. That is why I stand here today. That is why I vouch for his character. With my life, the silence stretched heavy with the weight of tragedy, of injustice, of grief that had no end. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. His face had gone pale. Mr. Boone, he said, these treaty documents appear to invalidate any claim you might make regarding Mr. Maddox's homestead or his right to offer sanctuary there. He peered over his glasses and these multiple witnesses to a public sale, regardless of your intended lesson, raise serious concerns about your fitness. As a guardian, Jed surged to his feet. You can't believe these. I can and do believe them. The judge cut him off sharply, especially given the testimony of respected members of this community. He nodded toward Widow Tollett and Miss Josie. Then the judge looked directly at Delilah. Young lady, would you approach the bench? Delilah stood. Her legs felt weak, but she walked forward, head held high. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the letter, the one she'd found, behind the loose board. In her old room, Your Honor. I found this letter from my mother, written before she died, hidden where only I would find it. Her voice was steady, stronger than she expected. She wrote, find someone who sees you the way I see you. Find a place where your light isn't called darkness. Delilah looked at Gideon, but then back at the judge. I found him, and I found that place. The cabin where Mr. Maddox lives. It was my mother's family cabin before she married my father. She grew up there. She blessed that mountain. With her presence, with her prayers, she held up the letter. My mother left me 2 letters, one at my father's house, one at the cabin, somehow knowing that I would need to find my way back there. Mr. Maddox didn't steal me. He led me home to the place my mother wanted me to be. The courtroom erupted. In whispers, Jed's face went from red to white. The judge raised his hand for silence. Mr. Boone, did you know your late wife's family cabin became Mr. Maddox's property? That's not relevant. I believe it's very relevant, the judge said. It suggests a connection, a rightness to this arrangement. That goes beyond the letter of the law. He looked at the papers before him, then at the crowd. Is there any other testimony? Widow Margaret Prescott stood. Slowly, deliberately, every eye turned to her, the wealthiest woman in Whetstone. Jed's apparent supporter, she walked to the front. Stood before the judge. Your Honor, I was friends with Delilah's mother before she married Jed Boone. She told me once, if anything happens to me, promise you'll watch over my girl. Margaret's voice was clear, strong. I failed her. I stayed silent. When Jed sold Delilah, I was a coward, but I won't stay silent. About what I saw, she pulled papers from her reticule, bank records. 2 weeks ago, I witnessed Sheriff Cole accepting $200 from Jed Boone. I asked my banker to investigate. These records show the transaction. The sheriff was paid to falsify documents to build a case. On lies, the courtroom exploded. Sheriff Cole's face went purple. He started to protest, but the judge's gavel came down hard. Order. I will have order. When silence returned, Judge Harrison shuffled through the papers before him, his expression grave. The evidence is clear. Jed Boone surrendered his parental rights through public sale and subsequent abandonment. Furthermore, his grazing claims. Being invalid, he has no standing to challenge Mr. Maddox's custody arrangements. On the grounds of property, he looked at Sheriff Cole with undisguised disgust. And you, sir, are hereby suspended from duty, pending a full investigation into corruption and falsification of official documents. The gavel fell again. As for you, Mr. Boone, you are fined $500 in order to leave Whetstone by sundown tomorrow. I will not have a man who sells his own child, poisoning this community further. You can't. Jed started. I can, and I have. This matter is closed. Final strike of the gavel. Jed stormed from the hall, leaving only the echo of his boots and the whispers of the crowd. Sheriff Cole followed, his badge already unpinned, his face the color of ash. The deputy moved forward, unlocked Gideon's handcuffs. They fell away. With a soft click, Delilah ran to him. Didn't care who was watching, didn't care about propriety or appearances. She threw her arms around him, pressed her face against his chest. "Let's go home, daughter," Gideon said quietly, his arms coming up to hold her. "Yes, Pa." And in that moment, surrounded by witnesses who had finally found their courage, their family was affirmed not by blood, but by choice, by truth, by love that had been tested and found strong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Whetstone's main street. As they prepared to leave, Gideon's wagon was loaded, the horses rested and ready. Miss Josie hugged Delilah tight. "You did it, child. You stood up and spoke truth. Your mama would be proud." Running Elk clasped Gideon's shoulder. "The mountain waits for you, brother, and so does peace." Tom Wheeler approached, hat in hand. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up that day. Should have stopped it then." "You spoke when it mattered," Gideon said. "That's what counts." Even Widow Prescott came, her face softer than Delilah had ever seen it. "Your mother and I were close once before." She trailed off. "I should have protected you. I'm sorry it took." "So long you did protect me," Delilah said. When it mattered most, they climbed into the wagon. Gideon took up the reins with a gentle click of his tongue. The horses started forward. Whetstone fell away behind them. The mountains rose ahead. Going home, the ride back was quiet, peaceful, so different from that first terrified journey. Months ago, when they reached the cabin clearing, everything looked the same. The stream bubbling, the goats bleating their welcome, the chickens scratching in their yard, but the hawk pen on the porch was empty. Delilah walked over slowly, looked inside. The bird lay still on the straw, its proud head tucked against its wing, as if in sleep. But she knew immediately it had passed Gideon. She called softly. He came to stand beside her, looked down at the hawk's still form. Together they carried it to a quiet spot near the garden where wildflowers nodded. In the evening breeze, Gideon dug a small grave while Delilah gathered blooms to lay over it, columbines, wild roses, sage. The sun was setting as they stood beside the fresh-turned earth. "You set it free," Gideon said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Delilah looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. "It set me free, too." She reached for his hand. This time he took it. Without hesitation, they stood there as the first stars appeared. A father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by choice, their shadows merging in the gathering dusk. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and late summer flowers. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill began its evening song. The hawk had never fully healed its wing, but in its final days it had known gentleness, had known care, had known that it mattered. Sometimes that was the greatest freedom of all. 3 months later, winter settled over the mountains like a gentle hand. Snow covered the peaks, made the world clean and new. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney, warm against the cold sky. Inside the cabin glowed with lamplight. Fire crackled. The scent of baking bread filled the air. Delilah sat at the table, her newest article spread before her. The Denver newspaper published her work regularly now, always under her real name, Delilah Boone. No more hiding. Behind Mary Grace, she wrote about building bridges between cultures, about healing divides, about the quiet strength of mountain communities. Gideon sat in his chair by the fire, carving, his hands steady as they shaped wood into small toys, horses and bears and birds, gifts for the children who came to learn, because there were children now. Every week, families made the journey up the mountain, both white and Ute. They brought their young ones to the school. Delilah had started under the big pine tree in summer in the cabin. During winter, she taught them to read, to write, to draw, to see beauty and worth in each other, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. At home, Running Elk came often, bringing elders to teach the old ways, the old stories. Gideon taught them Bible verses sometimes, but gently, without preaching, just sharing wisdom. Widow Prescott sent books. Tom Wheeler donated slates and chalk. As Miss Josie helped with lessons when she passed through on her rounds, the mountain had become a place of learning, of healing, of hope. Not everything was perfect. Not everything was healed. One night, thunder rolled across the peaks. Lightning split the sky. Delilah woke to the sound of Gideon gasping. Downstairs, she climbed down the ladder quickly, found him sitting up in his rocking chair, eyes wide, fire smoke, screams that weren't there. He could hear. "Pa," she said softly, sat down beside him, didn't try to touch him, just presence, just being there. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking. "They're still with you," she said quietly, "Sarah and Joseph. And that's okay. They're part of our family, too." He nodded, unable to speak. Slowly, his breathing calmed. The phantoms faded. He came back to the present. "Thank you, daughter." She stayed with him until the storm passed, until he could sleep again. Some wounds never fully healed, some ghosts never fully left. But they could be born, especially when you didn't have to bear them alone. A week before Christmas, Delilah sat at the table, writing in her journal by lamplight. Gideon was working in his shop, the sound of his tools carrying through the quiet evening. She wrote about gratitude, about finding home in unexpected places, about how the worst moments of our lives can sometimes lead to the best. She wrote about her mother, about the letters that had guided her home, about how love transcends death, continues through those we touch. She went to the trunk in her loft, the one that had been locked for so long. It stayed unlocked now, a reminder that secrets shared lose their power. "To wound," Delilah pulled out her mother's letter. "Read it again." As she did every week. "You were never the problem, my darling. You were always the answer." She folded it carefully, placed it beside Sarah's shawl. Two mothers, both loving her, both blessing her path, even from beyond. The grave below, she heard Gideon banking the fire, getting ready to sleep. She climbed down the ladder, went to him. "Good night, Pa. Good night, daughter." The words they said every night now, simple but carrying the weight of everything they meant to each other. On a cold January morning, Delilah was preparing lessons. When she heard voices outside, she looked through the window. A man on horseback, rough-looking, hard-faced, and beside his horse, being dragged along by a rope tied to her wrist. A girl, maybe 14, thin, terrified, her dress torn, her feet bare. Despite the snow, Delilah's blood went cold, then hot. She knew that look. Had worn it herself. Not so long ago, she stood, smoothed her apron, looked at Gideon. He was already moving toward the door, already understanding. Delilah stepped onto the porch. The cold air bit her cheeks, but she barely felt it. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice steady, strong. "Might the girl warm herself by our fire while you rest your horses? It's a cold morning for traveling." The man pulled up short, looked at her with suspicion, then at the cabin, calculating. "She's trouble," he said. "Running off, needs to learn. Her place, perhaps," Delilah said calmly. "But she's also cold, and we have hot coffee, cornbread fresh from the oven. Seems a shame to let it go to waste." The man hesitated, greed warring with suspicion. "Just for a few minutes," he said finally. "While I water the horses." He untied the rope from the girl's wrist, pushed her toward the cabin. The girl stumbled forward. Delilah caught her, steadied her. Their eyes met, brown eyes, frightened, but underneath, a spark. "Orber, waiting for wind?" Delilah smiled gently. "Come inside. You're safe here." She led the girl into the warm cabin, sat her by the fire, wrapped a blanket around her thin shoulders, poured hot coffee, cut thick slices of cornbread with butter. The girl ate like she was starving, probably was outside. Gideon was talking to the man, calm, reasonable. Delilah couldn't hear the words, but she knew Gideon, knew his quiet strength, his ability to see the truth beneath the surface. The girl looked at Delilah with desperate hope. Are you like me?" she whispered. "I was," Delilah said once, "but not anymore." She touched the girl's hand. Just briefly, a connection, a promise. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Well, Emma, my name is Delilah, and this is my pa's cabin. You're safe here." Through the window, she saw the man mounting his horse Gideon had bought. Whatever story, the girl had been sold under, paid him off, sent him away, just like Running Elk had bought Gideon's grief with presence, just like Miss Josie had bought Delilah's trust with care. The cycle continued. Pain paid forward, but so did healing. The man rode away, down the mountain, out of sight. Gideon came inside, looked at Emma, then at Delilah. "Reckon we'll need another bed." "In the loft," he said simply. Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, tears of purpose, of meaning. She looked at Emma, at this frightened girl who'd stumbled into sanctuary. "Welcome home," she said. And outside, the snow fell softly, covering yesterday's tracks, making room for tomorrow's footprints. Little fire who waits was done waiting. Now she burned, bright and steady, a beacon for others, lost in the dark and the mountains held them all. Broken pieces finding wholeness, lost souls finding home, one at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage. At a time the story wasn't over, would never be over, as long as there were wounded hearts and open doors, as long as there were people willing to choose love over convenience, family over blood, truth over comfort. The mountains remembered, the stream sang, the fire burned, and in a small cabin on a high ridge, three souls, once broken, now healing, sat together in the gathering twilight, bound by choice, strengthened by struggle, made whole by love that refused to give up, the end and the beginning.